for tuning into our program this morning, focused on landscaping your shorelines. My name is Camille Marcotte, and I'm the Water and Ecology Educator with Cornell Cooperative Extension in Onondaga County. I'm just going to go over a couple of quick basics in case you haven't joined us for one of our Zoom sessions in the past, and then I'll turn it over to our speaker, Angela. So we are using Zoom in webinar mode, so that means you are all muted right now and you don't have access to video, just to cut down on any background noise. If at the end you'd like to ask a question, you can always use the raise hand feature and I can unmute you if you'd like to ask it through audio. We're going to wait until the end to answer any questions, but feel free to type questions into either the chat or the Q&A functions throughout the presentation, and I'll be monitoring those for when we get to the end, and I'll ask Angela any questions that appear there. If you do want to ask a question anonymously, you can do that through the Q&A, just in case for some reason you feel uncomfortable associating your name with your question. This session will be recorded and posted to our Skaneateles Lake website, as well as our Cornell Cooperative Extension website, and I will share the link with everyone who registered, as well as an evaluation link for the program. I'm going to try to advance my slides. There we go. I'm just going to quickly introduce CC Onondaga and the Skaneateles program before I turn it over to Angela. So CC Onondaga is part of the nationwide extension system. In New York State, it's run through Cornell University, and Cornell Cooperative Extension has some type of presence in every single county in New York State. We provide research-based information and resources on a variety of topics. The program areas that we have here at CC Onondaga cover 4-H, agriculture, horticulture, nutrition, and natural resources. One program that we have is our Skaneateles Lake Education Program, which is the program that I work on. This program is funded by the City of Syracuse to maintain the water quality of Skaneateles Lake. So we do this through offering different workshops and training, outreach to stakeholders. We share resources and information with people who contact us, asking us for information on a variety of topics related to water quality. And we also periodically send updates to folks through our social media, our listservs, newsletters. Sometimes we actually do direct mailings to people in the watershed as well. And we actually have a new website for the Skaneateles Lake watershed, which was created through a partnership of the local watershed communities, the City of Syracuse, Onondaga County Soil and Water Conservation District, and CC Onondaga. So that's scanlakeinfo.org, so you can visit that website and check it out. So I'm now going to introduce our speaker today, Angela. Angela Wheeler is a Master Gardener volunteer with the Cornell Cooperative Extension of Onondaga County. She supervises the native plant garden at Clark Reservation State Park and is a board member of the Friends of Clark Reservation. Angela currently serves on the Town of DeWitt Conservation Advisory Council. Until her retirement, she was a professor, librarian at Coulter Library of Onondaga Community College. She lived on both Tully Lake and Song Lake for a total of 20 years, and she now lives in the Jamesville, DeWitt area. So I will stop sharing and turn it over to you, Angela.
Great. Let me share my screen here. Welcome, everyone. I hope this is informative for you. I had a great time putting it together. Here we go here. All right. And I'm going to go back a little bit here. As you know, all right, there's the get started here. As Camille just said, which she spoke about Cornell Cooperative Extension, bringing experience and research-based solutions together, helping New York State families and communities. The Master Gardener Program is a national program of trained volunteers who work in partnership with the Cooperative Extension to help the public. What we will be covering, I'm going to cover The nature of lakes in general, and geologically, I guess, in the big scheme of things. We will be covering what you should be doing before you begin a shorescaping project, design plan and materials, techniques, plants to use. Some plants are better than others, and maintenance. All right, let's get into the nature of lakes. Lakes, most natural lakes in central New York were formed by glacial action. I think most people are aware of this in central New York. There's a little schematic of a receding glacier. Receding glaciers carved out many of the lakes. There are many different types of glacial lakes. Finger lakes, of course, everyone's familiar with. There are kettle lakes, and there are other types of lakes. And that's how they were formed. So most natural lakes in central New York were formed probably about, the glaciers receded probably about 10 to 15,000 years ago. So that's when they were formed. The life cycle of a lake, the natural life cycle, is to fill in. That's what they are always working toward. Now, some lakes are going to take a little longer than others, obviously. But what they want to do is become a marsh or a bog and eventually disappear and turn back into woodland. The way the whole northeastern United States was basically woodland. So that's the natural state of central New York. It's a natural process, turning back into land, turning into a wetland. It's called eutrophication. And lakes will exhibit some characteristics of eutrophication. It's very natural. It doesn't mean they're disappearing immediately. They're just going in that direction. So this sort of what you're looking at here might not be very attractive when you're used to looking at sparkling water, but it is a very natural thing, very natural process. Okay, human activity on lakes has accelerated eutrophication. Number one, the biggest reason is clearing waterfront and planting turf grass. And we'll talk about that a little more in the coming slides. But as you can see by these photos, there is nothing there but turf grass. In the lower photo, you can see the erosion caused by the removal of all the vegetation. Also, homeowners sometimes put leaves and other organic waste into the lakes thinking they'll just go away. They're organic, they're not, poisoning the lake, but that certainly contributes a great deal to sedimentation, which contributes to lake weeds, of course. Now, this also means that if people are using chemicals on their lawn or even oil from driveways, things like that, everything is going to wash into that lake because of that slope. Plantings can help mitigate and slow this process. So here's another schematic that shows very clearly what happens. If the lawn is the main component of the yard, there's little protection to the lake from runoff. So you're getting, as I mentioned, everything that goes on that lawn or even in the driveway is going down that hill. The path from the house directly straight down to the lake is like a chute. Rain will move even faster down impervious surfaces like that one. So what we're going to do is try and mitigate this and slow it down. The purpose of plantings on a shoreline are to stabilize the shoreline so you won't have erosion, so you can keep your shoreline instead of losing it year by year. We want to, of course, beautify it. We want it to look nice. It goes without saying. You also want to maintain your views. If you are really adamant about that, you can also maintain views with still planting along the shoreline. And it will help maintain your habitat as well for wildlife. Things you want to keep in mind when we're heading into a project like this. Climate change is a big one. This chart shows the observed change not in total precipitation, but in very heavy precipitation events. So this chart is only dealing with the top 1% of the heaviest rain events. It's the time period shown here is from 1958 to 2012. And this is from the U.S. Global Change Research Program. As you can see, the Northeast has experienced a huge increase in very, very heavy rainfalls. So this is definitely going to impact your shoreline. You may already have noticed some changes in your shoreline due to these downpours. And some models project less moderate rainfall, longer dry periods, offset by occasional heavy events, which is exactly what we've seen this summer. All right, before you begin, you want to check wetland regulations and permitting issues. Depending on how much you're going to disturb that bank, there may be regulations, and you don't want to get in violation of any regulations, of course. So you want to check with the DEC, you want to check with the local towns, county, and possibly even the City of Syracuse, especially in the case of Skaneateles, to make sure that there's nothing you have to do as far as permitting for what you have planned. All right, let's talk a little bit about hydrology. Before you begin, you want to examine your property and you want to pinpoint areas of intense runoff. When you have these intense rain events, you want to look for areas like this, where the rain is going to start cutting through the ground. That can be a real issue. So you want to identify those areas. You want to identify areas of pooling water, not only during rainfalls, but you may have areas that are wet all the time. You want to identify those. Those need special attention as well. Areas of intense wave action. Perhaps you live on a point, and there is more wave action on one part of that point than others. You want to identify all of this. So you really have to be familiar with your property before you start shorescaping in order to do a really effective job. Study your lakefront to see what type you have. Is it a wetland? Is it steep? Is there a bluff? Look at the existing vegetation. That's very important. What's already growing there? What's doing well? What isn't doing very well? And are they native plants, or have they been introduced? Are they exotic plants? Soil type, as with any type of planting or gardening, you need to know what type of soil you have. It may be sandy on a lakeshore, depending on which lake. We may have gravel. Gravel is very common for lakefronts in central New York. You may also have clay, and you may have a combination. That's very common too, a combination of all three, because the glacier left a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So you're going to find combinations a lot. And you want to think about if you're going to need erosion and sediment controls when you plant. Is your slope steep enough? Like this slope here is quite steep. You might want to look into erosion controls, burlap mats, things like that. And you can find those at your local hardware stores, the bigger stores as well, or even online. Okay, other things you want to look at: exposure to wind, exposure to waves, environmental conditions. The sun, very important. Which side of the lake are you on? Do you get morning sun? Do you get evening sun? Many lakefront properties have their lake shore area is wide open, so it really does get predominantly full sun, but yours may be different. You may have trees there. Those are going to impact what you're going to plant. Okay, water depth, coves and bays. This is going to impact the water movement too. So you want to be aware of where those are, the deeper areas, the shallow areas, things like that. They affect water temperature. All of that's going to affect your plantings. And do you have new or old construction? If you have old construction, chances are you have older growth. Hopefully at least a few trees on that shoreline to help hold on to that land, to hold on to your shore. And also contractors, if you're building a new place on a lake, contractors often will just clear everything out because that's the easiest way to do it. And who can blame them? It's the easiest way for them. There was a case on a local lake where A woman was building a house on the lakefront, and the contractor cleared everything off, and the neighbors who were aware of the impacts of that were very upset. She had no idea of the contribution that plantings make to a shoreline, but she just went with whatever the contractor said, and the contractor just leveled everything. So just make sure that you are the person calling the shots if you're building. And tell the landscaper you want them to leave a strip at the bottom, and you can decide later on what you would like to keep and what you would like to take out. If you're using a landscaper for this project, you should know many will want to install what everyone else has so that your property looks like everybody else's property. Or also they will want to put in what they have a lot of. That's certainly a natural business decision for them. And many landscapers are not shorescaping experts. They may know plants, but they may not know what's going to work on your shorescape. So you want to be careful to choose a landscaper that has some experience with that. And keep in mind, you are concerned enough to be attending this webinar. You are going to be the expert when it comes to your property. You know what you want. You will know what you want done and what you don't want done. And stick to your guns, because contractors, as I'm sure a lot of you know, want to do things their way, and you want to do things your way. So it's your house. This is your chance to call the shots. Be sure they're aware of and will respect your wishes regarding your project. All right, all of that is before you even start. You want to look at those things. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the actual zones involved when you're planting. The first zone is a zone that is pretty much in the water, the piece of property adjacent to the shoreline, underwater most of the time. It varies in depth depending on the time of year, lake level, and wave action. And it is usually very shallow. A lot of light gets through, and it will support plant life. This is a really important area. This is where the sediment lands, right here in this area. There may be some grass there already. There may be more than that. Depending on what you use all of your shorefront for, you may want to just leave that unless they are invasive species. And the key there is identifying what exactly you have there. Unless they're invasive, you may want to leave them. They are helping maintain your shoreline. They're helping a lot. So things like cattails, things like that, you want to leave those alone and just let them go, because they are the best thing for your shoreline. You want this zone to be as natural as possible. Because it builds beaches, it reduces erosion, and you want to leave all those aquatic plants if you have them. And if you don't, you may want to consider adding them. Now, you want an area, of course, where you can get in and out of the water, where swimmers can go in, where you can put maybe a boat. But the rest of the lakefront, consider leaving the aquatic plants or adding more. Okay, the emergent zone is just what it says. It's where you emerge from the water. It's the transition between water and land. It may be narrow or it may be wider. It depends on your lakefront. Could be a steep bluff, jagged rocky shoreline, or a broad beach. So there's many different types. Those plants are going to need to like the water. They're going to have to be plants who don't mind being wet a certain portion of the year, weeks, even a couple months. They won't be water plants that are in the water all the time, but they'll be plants that don't mind having, as they say, wet feet. In the emergent zone, you want to maintain a natural slope and natural vegetation, and try to avoid impervious methods like seawalls and riprap. And the reason for this is that these impervious surfaces, that when the waves hit them, the energy does not dissipate. It just bounces off and goes back in other places on the lake. Whereas if you have plants there and you have soil there, that absorbs the energy more than something impervious like seawalls or riprap. Okay, again, the emergent zone, maintain a natural slope and vegetation, avoid, just what I said, avoid impervious methods, and you will be able to absorb the energy of the waves and water. You can see some cardinal flower in here, some reeds. Those are plants that don't mind having wet roots at times. The riparian zone is up a little bit further, up in here, not very wet. It will be wet at some point of the year. There's a high water mark is right here. So their roots will be wet at some point, but not for very long. This is a critical area from 30 to 50 feet from, upland. You're talking upland here, not width, but going up the hill, up the slope. As wide as you can make it, really, and you want this loaded with plants because this is going to slow down the runoff a great deal. You don't want any structures here. Now, obviously, if your house or camp is already here, you can't do much about that, but you can still plant around it and slow down that runoff. And you certainly don't want to add any new structures. That's just a rigid structure is going to, again, interfere with the natural absorption of the water into the ground. Riparian zone is ideal for planting native trees and shrubs. The stability of the zone contributes to a longer lifespan for the natural materials. So they'll be there for a while. Once they get situated, they'll be there for a while. So it's a great place for shrubs and a few trees here and there, or all trees. It doesn't matter either way. The more roots you get in there, the whole point is the more roots you get in the ground, the less runoff you're going to have, less erosion. And then there's the upland zone. It's the area, at the top of the slope. You can see it right here. That's usually where your structures are. And this area, these charts assume probably 40 or 50 feet in here. You may not have that much land, or you may have a lot more land than that. So you have to kind of adjust your shorescaping plan. Again, should be naturally vegetated, and I'll get to the reasons for that in a minute. Using native plants and shrubs and trees of all sizes, and certain species are much better suited to lake shores than others, and I'll go over that also. Now, when you have a straight runaway, or a straightaway rather, down to the water, this is what's going to happen. The water speeds up in this clear area, and it facilitates runoff and pollutants into the lake, and you're going to actually lose lakefront. It's going to wash right into the lake. Now, if for your lake access, if you have stepping stone pathways or any kind of pathway that has earth around where you step, that allows the water to sink into the ground and keeps it from washing out your soil right into the lake. Any pathways should meander. So if you have a long slope down to the lake, try and do a pathway that goes back and forth. Like this one. This one runs parallel to the slope and then turns and runs back this way. Much better for runoff. You should change the elevation of the pathway whenever possible to slow down. So slow down that runoff. So up and down kind of pathway. And again, the steps spread apart are much better than stairways. So to recap, good shoreline plantings have ground covers, grasses, perennials, shrubs, trees, and some aquatic plants. And please note the snow on the ground in this photo. They are planting very late. Hopefully it's not October, hopefully it's November. But in any case, this is a great time to do some planting. The water is as low as it's going to get, usually, unless your lake is very different from most in central New York. The water is very low. You can get them in there. The plants are getting dormant, so they do grow a bit, but they're not going to have big spurts of growth, but it gives them a chance to get a good footing before the next growing season. And the cold of winter will not bother native plants. They're used to it. That's what they do. When plantings alone aren't enough, if you have a really steep slope, you're going to need some help. And you can certainly put in some boulders, rocks to anchor. In this case, they have the rocks here. The plants are behind, so they won't get washed out. You can use a combination of the gray, which is, of course, the rock, and green methods. All right, a design plan. This is a very professional design plan. Yours does not have to look like this, but you want to know ahead of time, where are you going to put the trees? Where are you going to put the shrubs? Ground covers, grasses, etc. Where are you going to put your plants? And that way you can move a little faster if you already have a plan in place. And most situations should have a combination, as in nature, a combination of all of these different types of plants. And the steeper the slope, the higher up the buffer area should be. In other words, you should be planting, the steeper your slope, the more plants, and the higher up you should be planting toward your building. And remember that shorelines function best not as formal garden areas with spaces between the plants, but as natural areas where there is a thick, dense planting. That's what you want. You want a lot of roots, and we'll be showing you that in a minute as to why. If you have any fallen logs and rocks, that's nature's way of keeping that shoreline in place. Leave them in place if you can, or move them to a more convenient area if they're in the way, of course, but they will help your plantings stay in place, and the logs will also provide nutrition for the plants as it rots away. And of course, any native plants that might appear or might already be there, please leave them there and just add to them. Now here's the root systems. This will give you an idea of why we want native plants. One of the reasons, there are many, many reasons, but one of the reasons we want native plants is because of their root system. They have a deeper, denser root system, especially those that are used to growing on lakefronts. They have huge ecological benefits, which I'm sure you're already aware of. Pollinator habitat is only one. They help insects, which are decreasing, as we know. That's been in the news of late. When the insects go, the birds go, and it just keeps going. So you can really do a lot of good as well as saving your shoreline here. Notice the turf grass, and you can barely see the root system. Most turf grasses grow outwards. They have rhizomes, stolons that grow outwards to spread. So they don't have much going down into the ground. And what you want is roots that go down into the ground. On this side, you see the natives, how long these roots go down. And this is true of especially the grasses. The grasses of native plants have very, very deep roots. So that's a great way to stabilize your shoreline. And speaking of grasses, here's some. Again, turf grass, maybe 6 inches, if that, 4 to 6, down. Little blue stem, switchgrass, beautiful grasses, clumping grasses. You can't really use them as turf grass because they form clumps, but they are just wonderful stabilizers. And American beach grass. Now, this prefers more sandy soil, but these two here would be at home on any Central New York lakefront. If you have a sandy soil around your lakefront, then you can use some American beach grass. Again, they help to keep the shoreline in place. They strain the water, so to speak, getting out the sediment, chemicals, all of that. They help cushion the wave action as well. Okay, I'm going to talk about native plants just a little bit so you know why I keep mentioning native plants. Native plants, for the most part, and there is a huge discussion of what is a native plant, what makes a plant native. Most of them were here before humans started trotting around from continent to continent. So They evolved on the continent. The important part for us in shorescaping is that these native plants are adapted to local conditions. They've been living on lake shores for thousands and thousands of years. And also a huge important piece of native plants, they have evolved relationships with insects and birds and other wildlife. Exotic plants, many insects which eat plants cannot eat exotic plants, which is why they are disappearing, because when a housing development goes in and it is landscaped with primarily exotic plants, which is the way it's done or has been done for the past 50 years or so, the insects cannot, for the most part, cannot eat most of those plants. So they disappear, and then the birds disappear. So this is why we're having decreases. So exotic plants are plants that are not, basically are plants that are not native. They're from other continents. They got here by human intervention. And most native insects, as I mentioned, cannot eat them or use them for reproduction. A monarch butterfly, of course, we're all familiar with that. That's a great example. It needs milkweed species or it can't reproduce. Some examples, people call this a red maple. It's not really a, certainly not a native maple. This is a Norway invasive, by the way, invasive Norway maple that they have bred to have this dark red leaf. The Crimson King is actually an exotic tree, not a native tree. Dandelion, yeah, we're all familiar with that. And butterfly bush, which is rapidly, it helps pollinators, yes, it's good for pollinators, but it has been becoming a nuisance in some areas by seeding out into woodland areas and wild areas. And they don't support habitat either, primarily because of the insects and the birds. So invasive exotic plants, you want to examine your property to see if you have any of these, because these are real problems. These will take over, and that's why they are labeled invasive by the DEC. An invasive plant is an exotic plant that does so well on its new continent that it forces out all the native plants and takes over. Some of them do this with allelopathy, which is means they exude substances that other plants cannot live in. So it gets the whole area to itself. Most of us are familiar with walnut trees. They do this. They exhibit allelopathy. They exude substances that other plants cannot live in. Well, few can, but most can't. This is spotted knapweed, that lovely purple flower we see in late summer. It's still blooming out there. Spotted knapweed is an invasive plant, and that's why you see solid swaths of it along the roadsides. Okay, I already touched on those points. This is Japanese knotweed, and I hope none of you are suffering through Japanese knotweed, because this is a hugely invasive plant. If you see a little patch of this anywhere on your property, take the time to dig it out, because it will take over. It goes under the soil and pops up. It sends runners out. I have a friend who has a huge patch of this running alongside one side of her property, and every time she mows her lawn, she is mowing down spotted and Japanese knotweed shoots that are coming up from 5 to 10 feet into her property. So if you have this anywhere, and it does like the water, I strongly suggest you get it out as soon as you can. And this is another one, purple loosestrife. Yes, it is gorgeous, absolutely beautiful to look at. However, nothing here, none of this area supports any kind of insects. They can't eat it. Our native insects cannot eat purple loosestrife. So the birds suffer, the fish suffer, because the fish need insects to live. So the whole habitat suffers when something like this is allowed to occur. So if you have this, I know it's pretty. There are native alternatives. There are native alternatives that can give you the same look and not have the devastating effect on the habitat. All right, some trees, suggested trees for native shoreline plantings. Birch, black gum, black willow. There are a lot of willows that love wet areas. Swamp oak, red maple loves areas, and this is the color of a red maple right here. They love wet areas. Pond pine, sycamores love wet areas, pin oaks, all of these, hemlocks love wet areas. Some native shrubs for shoreline plantings, a lot of dogwoods, red twig dogwood is a beautiful dogwood that has bright red twigs. So all winter long, you see these bright red twigs against the snow. It's just gorgeous. Winterberry is a type of holly, buttonbush, viburnums, few viburnums grow well. Chokeberry, elderberry, you can get some nice berries off of that. Spice bush is a great choice. There are many great choices for trees and shrubs and for plants. Some suggested plants. I'm not going to go over each one, but in the picture here we have New England aster, very tall, will grow very tall. Blue flag iris grows, they like wet roots. You could put these right along the shoreline. They would be very happy and they're gorgeous. Let's see, and the rest of these, all of these would like your shoreline. These ferns, sensitive fern and royal fern are the two that don't mind moisture. They really like moisture. Actually, they, of course, being ferns, don't like full sun. So you have to be always aware of where you're putting a plant. Okay, here's some more. In case you were looking for more, there are many, many plants you can choose from. Native sunflowers are a great choice. Hibiscus, there's a native hibiscus, beautiful pink flower, likes it wet. A lot of grasses, turtle heads, etc. And rushes, this is a rush here. I'm going to talk a little bit about sustainable practices. Pesticides and herbicides are killing a lot of birds, as you can see, 65 million birds each year because they eat things with pesticides or herbicides and die, basically. It's affecting their eggs. And also, it's in our children. If you are using pesticides or herbicides in your yard, there have been studies, they found residuals in children. So they're being passed on, and a lot of people aren't aware of this. These are things people should know. Everyone makes their own choices, but these are facts. These are science-based facts, research studies that people should know about. And they kill all insects, including bees and other beneficial pollinators. These substances are not selective. They also affect your soil. They affect soil bacteria, which is a living being, and also fungal hyphae, which facilitate the uptake of nutrients into the plants. So it helps them get more nutrients in. Maybe when you've been digging at some point in your garden, you notice this white, filmy substance like this. These are funguses that help plants with their nutrients. So these are good things, which is why they're saying that you shouldn't do too much digging in your garden. You should just dig enough to plant a plant, because when you dig up or till an entire area, you are breaking all of those hyphae connections, all those fungal connections that actually help, and it has to rebuild after over the course of a few years. This is a symbiotic relationship, plants and fungi, and it helps, again, water and nutrient absorption. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and see if there are any questions.
So I'm not seeing anything yet. So if anyone has a question, you can type it into the chat. You can type it into the Q&A. You can also click the little raise hand button and I can unmute you. Let's see. Oh, Patty asked the question, how do we get rid of the lawn?
Getting rid of the lawn. My favorite subject. I'm just doing that in my own yard, bit by bit each year. I found the easiest way to do that, first of all, a cautionary tale, which I have from my own experience. I last fall put leaves down and put a layer of 4 to 6 inches of compost on top of the leaves and threw seeds. And it worked out great. Seeds started coming up. And then I noticed plants started coming up that looked way too mature for having come from seed the previous year. And lo and behold, it was spotted knapweed, which had been lurking in the grass. And I didn't examine the grass before I put down the leaves. So you want to examine your grass and make sure, because I had to dig those all up, make sure there aren't any really bad weeds like knapweed, really tough weeds. And if you're lucky enough and you don't have these, all you really have to do is right now put down either leaves or paper or cardboard. If you're using paper, you need 4 to 6 sheets. You can use newspaper and put that down, cover it with a layer of compost. And you can seed native plants right now because that's when they're sending out all their seeds. Or you can wait till the spring and cast seeds and plant in it, but no digging. That's my favorite part, no digging. And it works so well. It's so easy. Just spread something down, paper, cardboard, or leaves, and leaves are great, and put compost on top of it and plant directly in the compost. So it's not, I'm doing a little bit each year. I'm not going to get rid of the whole lawn, but there are areas that I don't use, and they're not doing well anyway. So might as well plant something that does some good. So that's what I found is the easiest and quickest way to get rid of lawn.
Great. Christopher asks, please talk more about how to treat very steep banks.
Very steep banks. You're going to need some help with that, some erosion control, some burlap, some, Camille, you mentioned wild staking, and I wasn't real familiar with that. Maybe you can mention that. But in a steep bank right now, you may try putting some plugs in. Now, it depends also, if it's a steep bank, chances are there's a lot of water washing against that, I'm guessing in the spring and maybe even throughout the summer. So shrubs may be a better bet, at least to get started, than plants. And shrubs like willows are great because they start rooting immediately and they're going to send out because they love being wet. So those would be great. You're just going to have to make sure that they're going to stay there. So live staking, Camille?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different techniques that you can use with stakes, live stakes. So the easiest for a homeowner to do is live staking. So something with willow or dogwood, and you kind of alternate them in kind of a triangular pattern to help secure the shoreline in place. There's a bunch of other techniques that you can do as well, like contour wattling and things like that. That's a lot easier to do with a company rather than yourself. If you're a homeowner, it can be really expensive. A lot of times they'll have to bring in some machinery for different techniques. So if you have a really, really steep shoreline, it can be very, very difficult. I know other restoration projects, they've tried to level the slope out a little bit just so it's not as steep, but that again is really expensive and can require a lot of sediment and erosion controls. So if you have a steep slope, it is really, really tricky. But there are a bunch of different techniques that you can look into, and there are some places that you can find resources. And so if anyone has a really steep slope and wants more information, you can contact myself and Angela, and we can try to help you figure something out too.
Yeah, I'd also suggest, I don't know what is at the top of your slope, but planting things immediately at the top, along the top of that slope to stabilize, because the top is next. I mean, that's the way a slope works, it just keeps eroding back towards the top of whatever hill it is. So if you can get some willows, dogwoods, etc., in along the top of that slope, that'll help at least stabilize it so it won't get too much worse, hopefully.
Yeah, that's a great point. And another thing to remember is some erosion is just natural, like it's going to happen anyways. And so I know we as humans kind of want to control the shoreline to, look how we want it to, but there's always going to be some erosion that's happening, and that's completely natural. It's just when you have, huge amounts of sediment dropping into a lake, that's when you want to do something. Let's see, another question from Tracy. She says, please discuss protecting from ice damage on the shoreline. It removes the rocks and timber barriers on our shoreline unless secured.
Okay, that's a little beyond my purview as far as, I mean, ice, again, that's a natural process. There's no way to stop that. That's going to be happening. And I think the plants actually are more suited to that sort of thing than the hardscape. The hardscape items are going to be tossed around, and that's going to happen every year. But trees and things like that are able to weather that sort of, they're more flexible, they're able to weather that. So it may be a good idea to get rid of those items that the ice is and try and replace them with plantings.
Yeah, trees are very hardy and a good thing to have, on the very bottom of your shoreline. And I know there are groups, at least in Skaneateles Lake, I'm not as familiar with the other lakes in the county and in the region, but there are people that are interested in doing some types of restoration on their property. So I know the Skaneateles Lake Association and the City of Syracuse will sometimes do projects if the erosion is that bad. So also contacting agencies that can actually help you if you have a steeper slope and need a lot more help than you can do on your own property, is a good thing to look into. Patty asks, should I pull up Vinca?
Yes. Yes. I wouldn't be crazy about it. If it's a huge amount. Again, I've done that myself in my own yard. I kept looking at it year after year, thinking I really should do something about that. And eventually I started doing it. And for me, it wasn't too awfully bad. It came up in big sheets. But that again is something that's just going to keep going and going. I don't think it's allelopathic, but it does tend to make monoculture of just that. And in Clark Reservation, there's an area that I use as an example. It's vinca across the entire, through the woods, and the rest of the growth there is buckthorn. That's all there is there, is two hugely invasive things. And there's nothing, there's no life there because of that. So if you have it and it's not too much of a trial, I would definitely recommend getting rid of it. You may try just smothering it. As I said about the lawn, you can try that, doing that with, as far as killing lawn, like because I had the knapweed, another area I use dark black plastic, especially in this hot, dry summer we had. It worked wonderfully, but it only really works well if you have direct sun. So if you have direct sun, cut that back with a weed whacker so it's right close to the ground, cover it with black plastic, stake it down, and just forget about it for the summer, or at least a month. You can peek under it after a month, see how it's doing. You can tell if it's dead or not. But yeah, black plastic's a great way to get rid of things you don't want.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. Patty has another question. She said, I have 10 to 15 small oaks on the bank, about 3 to 4 feet apart. Can I take some out in order to have a view? Also, they seem too close together, but I don't want to promote erosion. Thanks.
Oh, oaks are such a powerhouse for habitat. They are, a white oak tree supports over 500 insects, depend on that oak tree to live. They are really wonderful. So if there's any way that you can improve your view just by trimming the oaks, I don't know how mature they are, but if you can, look up and see if you can find some limbs or identify, really look at them carefully. Most people will just go out and cut them all down so they can see. But if you really look at them and study them, or have an arborist in and tell them your concerns that you'd like to keep the trees but improve the view, they may be able to do it in a way that will help that. Because those trees along a shoreline are just gold. I mean, I can't emphasize it enough. I mean, that will keep your shoreline intact. So whatever you can do to minimize damage to them would be great. And I understand a lake view is just, there's nothing like it. I mean, it soothes your soul. So, but I think there can be a compromise.
Absolutely. Kathy asks, can you recommend good natives that are really short, especially shrubs, that preserve view of the lake but have good root systems?
Dogwoods are a good one. There are some shorter dogwoods. I think silky dogwood is very common in central New York. I see it all the time walking in the woods. Beautiful plant. There are a number of shorter dogwoods. Just be sure when you buy them, what it says. And even if the description says it goes up to 12 feet, if that's too tall for you, 12 or 15, if you trim them, and you won't have to do this all the time, eventually they'll just stay at, they're mature. Once they mature, they'll stay at whatever height you've trimmed them down to. So I would say dogwoods, viburnums also, they get up, I think it's usually 10, 12 feet, but you can find shorter viburnums, native viburnums. Those would be a great choice as well. And there are many, many others. In that, I have a handout that you're all going to get listing shrubs, and I believe it does list the height. So the hollies are shorter also. Yeah, you want to look at the handout, and then whenever you're buying something, be sure and take note of the height, because a lot of native shrubs top off at about 12 to 15, and there are many that are 6 to 8, and a few also that are 4 feet. So there's a lot to choose from.
Kathy is asking any that are 3 feet or less.
You could find them. They do have dwarf versions of these. And as long as they're finding, like, dwarf versions are cultivars. They are kind of manipulated to exhibit characteristics that humans would. So they've been manipulated by horticulturalists to assume a certain shape or a certain color. If the dwarf has the same leaf color, I think, and flower color. They're just starting to do research on this, and they find that if the flower color of a cultivar, good example would be coneflower, purple coneflower. You can find them in any color of the rainbow now. If the flower color is different enough from the original, the insects are less likely to use that plant. So that's up to you. That's your decision. I don't think a dwarf version would affect that. They haven't done any studies that I've seen yet of how that would work. And if it looks similar and the colors are similar to the insects, then it should be fine. That's the only caveat I would give you as far as using cultivars. So yeah, you could go for dwarf versions too.
Great. Actually, my coworker Cindy asks, aside from digging, are there any other ways to get rid of Japanese knotweed?
Aside from digging. And you know what? I haven't heard, there are some methods I've heard. There is one method where you get old carpeting and put it, all of this starts with cutting it right to the ground and then putting old carpeting on it and weighing it down. And I can't imagine how long you would have to leave that, probably a very long time. Knotweed is like the worst. I mean, it's just the worst. I've also heard of cutting it to the ground and very selectively using herbicides, and there are some organically derived botanic herbicides, but I don't think they'll be real effective with knotweed because it is so viral. So you can use herbicide very selectively, but I would try smothering it first. It's going to need a lot of weight and a real thick smothering, and you want to cut it right to the ground in the spring. And see how that goes. I saw in Boston on a walk, someone had tried to do it with black plastic, and it was just shoving the plastic right up out of the way. I mean, it is very strong plant.
Yeah, Cindy, if you try something, you'll have to report back to us.
Yes, I would like to know too.
Kathy asks, do blueberry bushes like wet feet?
Offhand, I don't believe they do, but you may be able to find one. The ones that I know of, the native ones anyway, I believe they like it drier, but off the top of my head, I'm not positive about that. But if you go to buy one, they'll let you know. And many native plants have a really wide range of soil that they prefer. So you can put them, like there are a number of plants that on their own in the wild, you'll see them only in wet areas, but if you put them in your yard, they do great. So it's kind of like trial and error with that. The one thing about blueberries, though, they like acid. And some of our lakes do have more acid soil. Coastal areas, I know, on the ocean have acidy soil. That's why the hydrangeas are always blue on Cape Cod and all of that. That's the acid in the soil. So they will do better. I have a blueberry out in my yard, but my soil has a lot of limestone in it, a great deal of limestone. And it gave me a little tiny group of blueberries this year, but it's never really grown much. I can tell it's just not very happy there. So they can be fussy, but just look into it when you purchase it. I don't think they really like a lot of moisture though.
Okay. Christopher asks, my mother planted lots of Pachysandra. How do you distinguish native from exotic?
I'm not real familiar with Pachysandra, but I have found Google to be a great resource. Just put in native Pachysandra and look at the images, and you should now make sure when you look at all those images that it is indeed native Pachysandra, because Google just looks for the words, of course, and just brings them all up. So a lot of that isn't what you Googled. But I have found that to be very useful when trying to ID plants. I'm not real familiar with native Pachysandra. I know there is one. I think I read a little bit about it just recently, and it doesn't give you that carpet that, exotic Pachysandra will give you. It doesn't look as neat as that, but there are a lot of native plants that aren't quite as neat as exotic plants. But doing it to protect a shoreline, then why not?
Kathy said, I have 2 blueberry bushes right on the shoreline that I want to move. They are just in the way. Should I move them this time of year?
Yeah, you could. So obviously those blueberries like water. Are they wet? Do they have wet roots a good portion of the year?
I'll just unmute. I don't know. I have only owned them 3 months. So they're just in the way. They're down on the shoreline and I can't, they're just in the way. I want them gone. So
yeah. Fall is a great time to transplant anything. Well, I shouldn't say that. Usually fall is a great time because we start getting rains.
Yeah.
We haven't gotten rains.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to water wherever you put them. You'll have to water them until we get some regular rain. But other than that, there's about a month left of growing. That should be good. That should work.
Yeah, I just want to relocate them. And I also put down there a link for the Pachysandra. It's Cornell, woodyplants.cales.cornell.edu. So that was a link on the Pachysandra. I found that while you were
Thank you.
Wait, I'm not seeing that link, Kathy.
Oh, did I not hit send? No, I think I did. There we go. Sorry.
Now I see it. Perfect.
I
So
forget to
great.
hit
That's
send.
awesome.
So that'll help on the Pachysandra. So, and I always do mention to folks, if you're doing any kind of research, put the words Cornell in front of the topic, and you'll find some really great information on whatever that particular subject. So that's what I did, was just Googled Cornell Pachysandra, native Pachysandra. So
Nice.
that'll help you.
Also, one other thing you can do is when you're searching for anything, not just plants, but anything at all, at the end of your search terms, space, and then you can put the word site, S-I-T-E, with a colon, and then put edu, gov, whatever you want to see, whichever domain you want to see, because if you put edu, everything that comes back will be from an accredited college or university, which are a lot of extension sites are at those places. ORG has a lot of extension sites too, but ORG is more sketchy. That could be just about anything, but that's something you can use searching also.
That's a great tip. Jean asks, do you know about phosphate-free fertilizers and or weed killers? I'm trying to maintain good neighbor relations. This guy is really proud of his lawn. Are there any New York State regulations?
I think phosphates have been outlawed in most lawn products and detergents and everything in New York State. Is that right, Camille?
Yep. So unless you have a new lawn that you've just put in that really needs the phosphorus, you're not supposed to be using any fertilizers containing phosphorus on your property, especially not within like 100 yards or feet of a water body. So that has been outlawed. Obviously, agriculture has its own rules. And if you do have a soil test that shows that you need phosphorus, then you can use fertilizer too, but most of the time you really don't need it. So it's really only if you're just trying to put in, newly established lawn.
And phosphorus will feed the weeds in the lake. If that runs off, that's like, well, it's fertilizer. It'll be putting fertilizer in the lake. So if weeds are a concern to your neighbor, you might mention to him that using phosphates on the lawn, with a smile, of course, are feeding also lake weeds.
Yeah, that's a great point. Let's see. Would you recommend a soil test on your shoreline before you plant?
Yes, always a soil test. Is it Cornell that has that great, I can't remember what it is, but I think Cornell does offer, or a company associated with Cornell offers soil testing. Yeah, that's a great one. It was, I think when I did it was $15. It wasn't too long ago. It's not very expensive, but yeah, they'll tell you a lot about your soil. And it's good to know the acid base component is a huge thing. A lot of hollies and blueberries like it acidy, other plants as well, and others will like it with more lime in it. So yeah, that's a big concern.
Yeah, definitely. So you can call our office and we can do soil tests for folks.
Super.
So
actually, I can speak about the soil test. You can actually find the paperwork on our website. Just go under the gardening tab, under soils and climate, and you can print out the forms. You can also pick up the forms here at our office, but we don't do the testing here. It goes to Agri One or Dairy One.
Yeah.
So yes, but you can, like I said, either download the forms from our website and or just pick them up here, but we don't actually do the tests here. So
yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
So I know my dad has used the soil testing through the local CC office in the Hudson Valley where they live. So he found it really helpful. He's a huge gardener, so highly recommend soil testing.
In fact, I can send, here's the link. Give me 1 second, copy.
Yeah, Kathy is our master gardener coordinator, by the way, in case everyone's like, who's Kathy?
I will hit send.
Not seeing any other questions in the Q&A.
But I just hit send, and so the link is in my chat. So if anybody just clicks on that link, that'll go right to the page, the soil page on our website. And it's pretty self-explanatory. And I think you're right, Angela, it's like $15, $18. So it would be Form H. Well, yes, Form H for homeowner. So it's pretty easy to follow along.
Great.
Great.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat either. And it's a little after 11, so I do want to wrap it up by saying a huge thank you to Angela. Angela, how can they get in touch with you if they have any other questions?
Oh, I don't think it's on the handout. It's, here, I'll type it in, my email address. Feel free. If I can't answer it, I'll try and find somebody who can.
And we also have the CCE Master Gardener at Gmail.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll let you.
Is that CCE Master?
Gardener.
There, does that look right? Oh, we don't see it yet. Okay, there we go.
At gmail.com, Master Gardener. Yeah.
Good.
Great.
This was fun.
Yeah, thank you so much, Angela, and thank you, Kathy, for being co-host. I briefly lost internet connection, so it's always nice to have someone else to help out. Like I mentioned, this will be recorded, and so we'll be posting it to our website. I'll be sending an email to everyone who registered with the fact sheet that Angela put together. I'll send her contact information as well, my contact information, and also an evaluation for the program. So thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope you have a great day.
Thanks,
Yep.
Angela.
Looks good.
Thanks, Camille.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye everyone.
Bye.